Hey now, welcome to the 9th episode of the Help Find the Others podcast. If you've been here all along, well then welcome back. And if this is the first time hearing this podcast, welcome. As I always do, I would like to start with a quote from an author that I like. This comes from Mr. Paul Stamets and his book Mycelium Running. I believe that mycelium is the neurological network of nature, interlacing mosaics of mycelium-infused habitats with information-sharing membranes. These membranes are aware, react to change, and collectively have the long-term health of the host environment in mind. So I chose to quote Mr. Stamets tonight because I want to start by talking about not psychedelic mushrooms, but just mushrooms in general. And my guest tonight is a longtime fan of this channel. He's been commenting on my YouTube videos and sending me emails and taking part in the Discord server chats. And I felt that definitely it was time to get him on the podcast. And it just so happens that he's very much into wild, gourmet, and medicinal mushrooms. So I wanted to have a discussion. So let me introduce Travis. How you doing there, man?
Good. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, no problem, buddy. And as always, the co-host Stan is on. How you doing, man?
Good.
Awesome. So, Travis, I think in one of your emails you mentioned that you and your family have a group to help people get over their fear of eating wild mushrooms or just a fear of wild mushrooms. Is that like a Facebook group or what were you talking about when you mentioned that?
It's a Facebook group. We don't have, like I was saying earlier, we just moved to Indiana this year, so we haven't started it here yet, but, we've had it for the past at least 6 years out in Colorado. So it's still going. We kind of passed the torch over to a buddy of mine there called Western Slope Fungophiles. Because we were on the western slope of Colorado, and fungophile kind of meaning, like someone who's really into mushrooms or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
So, and that was the main goal of our group. We would have, yearly discussions at the library. We would take people out on forays, do as much like community work as we could to just kind of get the people over the fear of mushrooms in general. Because in this country, especially, growing up as a child, most of us are told by mom and dad, if you see a mushroom, don't even touch it. Like, just walk around it. Don't touch it. Just look at it from afar because could be dangerous and it could kill you. And the more I, learned about mushrooms, I learned how that's very untrue. So I kind of took the approach of, let's start a group to kind of get people over the fear of mushrooms. Because if you travel to other parts of the world, it's almost a religion to families, or like a pastime, where they'll take grandkids and children out mushroom hunting. So that was kind of our main focus, was, trying to get the people over the fear. And come this spring, here in Indiana, we're going to start that group up here and get it going here for us. So, yeah.
Yeah. No, that's awesome. Now with talking with people that would come into the group that were afraid of mushrooms, like what do you think that fear is? Because, and I can go into that too. But I mean, I was that way as well. But what were some, stories from people? Like, why do you think that people seem to be afraid of mushrooms?
I think it's just our culture in this country. I'm sure it's like that elsewhere, but mostly I think it's the culture we have is the fear of the unknown. Of course, everybody wants their kids to be safe and not be harmed. So it's just better to side on, err on the side of caution. So it's just, parents growing up, everybody has mushrooms growing in their front yard at some point in the year. And parents, I guess just get too busy to learn themselves. So they just tell the kids, don't touch it, stay away from it. That could kill you. Don't even touch it. And then that just kind of snowballs over generations because of the unknown. It really is just the fear of the unknown. And like I try and teach my kids, knowledge is power. So I think it just roots from our culture.
Yeah.
And trying to keep our kids safe,
Yeah. I guess it's kind of the same, like why everyone's afraid of spiders. Like, you're just told like, oh, that's a poisonous spider, or whatever. But if you actually took the time to learn about spiders, like there's really only a couple that you really need to really worry about. The rest of them aren't going to do anything to you.
Exactly. And like the more I got to know about mushrooms, of course, the less I was afraid of them. And I see these people with like houseplants that are actually poisonous. And I'm sitting there like thinking to myself, you're telling your kid not to touch a mushroom, even though touching the most poisonous mushroom won't do anything to you. You could actually even chew it in your mouth and spit it out and it wouldn't do nothing to you. But you have these poisonous houseplants in your house that if your dog ate it or your kid ate it, it would kill them. So it's like people don't understand, that they have these plants all around them that are even more poisonous in some cases,
Yeah. Oh yeah, for sure. Yeah. Yeah, I know, I mean, I wouldn't say that prior to getting a love of mycology, I wouldn't say that I was afraid of mushrooms. It was more just, I thought they were gross because what's the standard mushroom that you'll see in salads or on pizza? It's these crappy button mushrooms that like, have a weird rubbery texture and really don't have a good flavor. And so like, I just didn't like them. And I just I still don't like them on pizza. I think it's one of the worst things you could put on a pizza, but that's just me. But I just kind of was like, I don't eat mushrooms. And I like made that very clear to people. And then, so, and this is probably more than 10 years ago. I ate psychedelic mushrooms at a music festival. And a friend of mine that was there who wasn't tripping was like, but knew that I didn't like mushrooms because I think I had made a big deal about pizza, mushrooms on pizza. And he saw me eating mushrooms and was like, oh, so you eat psychedelic mushrooms, but you won't eat regular mushrooms, made some kind of joke about that. And then like, for whatever reason, because it was like when I was eating the mushrooms, I kind of like started thinking about that later on in my trip. I was like, why is that? And I had this whole kind of like inner dialogue about eating mushrooms. And then so like afterwards, I was like researching, like gourmet mushrooms and stuff like that. And that's where I ran across morel mushrooms. And started reading, forums and stuff like that, where everyone's like, oh, they're like, it's like steak, and everything, the glowing reviews of it. And so, and then I got in my head and just, from like kind of starting to research and everything, I was like, man, I really want to find morel mushrooms. And so I went and just started like, I was working in, outside in the woods. So whenever I was working, I was like, I'm going to look for these mushrooms, but I forgot to like look at what time of year they would be and stuff like that. And so this one day we were eating lunch and we were sitting down and we were in a park, and I look to my left, just where I'm sitting, just wherever we stopped to eat lunch. And I'm sitting on a log and there's a morel mushroom sitting there. And I was like, and one of my friends knew about mushrooms, and I was like, dude, is that one of those morel mushrooms? And he's like, oh yeah, dude, it sure is, and I picked it and I'm like looking at it and then, but that kind of fear or like disgust more than fear of like, I'm not going to eat it. And he was like very adamant of like, he's like, if you're not going to eat it, I'm going to eat it. and so like, after he kind of talked me into like, he told me how to cook it and stuff like that. He's like, go home. He's like, if you don't like it, it's because there's something wrong with you. He's like, it's a delicious mushroom. So, and it was a pretty big one. Probably, about the size of your fist, and so I went home and cut it up or soaked it in salt water and cut it up and cooked it the way he said. And from that point on, I was just hooked on on gourmet mushrooms, and I started researching more, and that's where I found. He told me about Paul Stamets, and I got into that from there. So what was like? Did you just kind of grow up in your family like eating wild mushrooms, or did you have to kind of discover it on your own?
No, it was on my own as an adult, kind of just like you, to be honest. Thinking back, it was just when I was in Colorado, I had a coworker that was like, hey, today after work, I'm going to go up to the mountains and see if I can find some snowbank morels. And that just kind of piqued my interest. I was like, oh, you could just go out and pick those. And like you, up till then, I'd really only had button mushrooms, which 9 times out of 10, when someone tells you they don't like mushrooms, that's what they're talking about. They don't like button mushrooms. So my response is, oh, you've never had a morel or you've never had a chanterelle. That's why you don't like mushrooms. You've never had a porcini. If you've had any one of those mushrooms, you would love them. So yeah, it was just a coworker just talking about going and picking morels. And so that got me kind of interested and started learning and, self-taught, just kind of picking up books nowadays with YouTube. And then where I happen to live, just a couple hours away, kind of a shameless plug here, was the Telluride Mushroom Festival, which has been going on for almost 40 years now. And living that close to a festival like that is kind of its own little festival. It's not like other mushroom fests. But I went to that one year, and that really opened my eyes and met some incredible people there to take me out and show me, and just kind of blossomed from there, And once I ate my first chanterelle, and out in Colorado, they have porcinis, which can be massive, and they taste like steak almost, and just kind of blossomed from there.
If you don't mind, what are some like specific resources that some of the listeners that want to get into something like this could access? I know you mentioned YouTube and books, but if you could get into maybe like a channel or an author. I know Paul Stamets is pretty, I don't know if he goes beyond the psychedelics, but anything like that, that'd be greatly appreciated, because that's something I'll even do some research in myself. And then also, if you could describe the taste more, I'd appreciate that. You're comparing it to steak, but for some reason in my mind, since I've never had any of these that you guys are discussing, I can't, in my mind's just not willingly accepting that they taste like steak.
So yeah, like a morel is a real dark flavor. It's a real, that's why people say steak, I think, because it's kind of a dark, meaty flavor. It's not, it's the closest thing I think people can come to is steak. It's very robust. When you eat a morel, like, it has just this robust flavor. Now, like a chanterelle is going to be a little more delicate. I would say sometimes kind of popcorny or nutty flavor to it. A porcini is going to be very robust and very steak-like, I guess. There's so many others. Like this year, moving to Indiana, I got to eat my first ever chicken of the woods, which they don't have in Colorado, and it was, I don't know, what would you say, Ruben? Have you had chicken before?
I've not eaten it, but I've seen it, and like my friends had harvested and taken it home and eaten it. Now that one, from what I've read, is more like light flavored, and it's the texture that people like, I think, right? That you fry it up and it's like crispy, almost like chips or fries, right?
No, it's pretty meaty in it. And I got personally, I got kind of like a seafood flavor out of it, almost like a lobster in a way.
Okay. So I could see that because, have you ever had lion's mane?
Oh yeah, yeah.
Yeah. So that's what I got from that is definitely a seafood flavor from that. So I could see that flavor from the chicken as well, I guess.
Yeah. And so yeah, I mean, there's so many different flavors out there. You know, like I was saying before, 9 times out of 10 people that don't like mushrooms is because they've never had anything other than button. So they're just such a wide range, you know. And when someone says I don't like mushrooms or I don't like chanterelles or something, it's like, if you make like you said, Ruben, you don't like mushrooms on pizza, try chanterelle pizza sometime with white sauce. It's delicious, and some spinach on there. Oh man, like the flavor kind of oozes out into the sauce, and it's very delicious. But Paul Stamets obviously is he's kind of the man here in America, and he goes far beyond psychedelics. His work goes into medicinals and edibles just for, you know, the table. And he has such a wide range of books, you know, out there. That Mycelium Running is obviously one of his latest books that kind of everybody's latched onto. And it's, I think, one of his best books, just because it's kind of like I don't know, it kind of gives an overall kind of look at what mushrooms do for the planet. And then he goes through a few different types in there, but he has such a wide range of books to go look at. Another one, as far as authors go, is David Aurora. He has a lot of good field guides and just, you know, books in general. Trying to think of some of my other authors I have. I go to Stamets to his books so many times because he's just kind of like the wizard. He's written so many books about it that he goes way beyond psychedelics.
Yeah, I had no idea, to be honest. The only, I guess, context I've listened to him in, I haven't even read any of his stuff, but it was like Joe Rogan's podcast. And for the majority of the time, you know, knowing Rogan, he's sticking to the psychedelic side of everything. So where would you rank, like, I guess the only other mushroom that I know of other than like mushrooms on pizza is like a portobello mushroom. Where is that in the ranking of mushrooms? Is it still very low?
I don't know, Ruben. What do you think? I wouldn't say it's low. I would just say it's, you know, it's the one that you can go to the store any time of the year and buy. If it's morel season, there's no way you're going to find me eating a portobello. If it's chanterelle season, if it's in season, I'm not eating anything from the store, to be honest. It's just now, you know, a good grilled portobello burger, you know, on the grill, that can be pretty good. You marinate it a little bit, and that can have some flavor to it, you know. I don't know if you've ever done that, Ruben.
Well, so I kind of look at the only time I buy mushrooms in the store is I just go, you know, to the grocery store. They sell like a gourmet blend, and it's like portobello, cremini, and oyster, and like I saute that into, you know, spaghetti sauce. But that's just if I'm just like making dinner and whatever. But what I've kind of found with me personally, and just coming from a you know, growing up not liking mushrooms to all of a sudden like finding wild gourmet mushrooms, is almost the same way that I feel with psychedelic mushrooms, in that, you know, if you were going to a store and, or, you know, if psychedelic mushrooms were legal and you were just going and just buying mass produced commercial psychedelic mushrooms, yeah, you would probably trip off of it. But I kind of feel like your experience would be more meaningful and more mystical if you either found those psychedelics in nature or put like a labor of love into growing them. And I kind of feel that way with gourmet mushrooms as well, or just other edible non-active mushrooms, is that if you're hunting for them and finding them, or if you're getting into cultivation and starting, have a mushroom farm going and stuff like that, they're like, it might be, just kind of a subconscious thing or whatever, but like, it's just a more tasty, meaningful experience of eating them. And so that's kind of how I look at portabella. I mean, I guess I could cook them and make them okay, but it's not as like, if I find a lion's mane and come home and make it, I'm like, oh my God, this is awesome. But if I could just go to the store and buy lion's mane, I don't know if it would be as meaningful and pleasurable of a meal, I guess. And that's just kind of how I look at portabella. Now, also, there was a part in Paul Stamets' interview on Rogan, which, to go back to that, like, it is kind of funny that now I'm starting to read, in all the psychedelic culture, like all of a sudden, like Stamets is the new McKenna almost because of that Rogan interview. But it's like, well, he was a really big deal before that. Just like, he definitely talked about psychedelics because he one of his books is the psilocybin mushrooms of the world. And I mean, it goes through all the the habitats and areas where you can find them and all that. But like among the gourmet and medicinal mushroom world, like everyone, he was already a big deal. He's just now, caught the eye of the psychedelic crowd. But he said something in that Rogan interview that he said, I can't remember how he put it, but he said that his life was a danger if he like told the secret of why it's possibly dangerous to eat portobello mushrooms. Did you guys catch that part in there?
Yeah.
So I've tried to research it, and I don't know what he's talking about. But since he said that, I've been like, well, I'm not going to eat portobello mushrooms.
Yeah. And, Rogan kind of brought him to the limelight. But like you said, he's in mushroom circles. He's been the man for decades. I mean, him and McKenna used to hang out. And, like I was saying earlier, going to the Telluride Mushroom Fest, Stamets is a frequent goer. He has talks at that almost every year, if not every other year. So I was actually able to meet him in Telluride. Another person I would like to kind of plug he's passed away just a year or two ago, but Gary Linkoff. He wrote
I've seen it.
Yeah, he wrote the Audubon book on mushrooms, and if anybody has time to go to YouTube, he tells a story in Telluride about his first experience on psychedelic mushrooms, and he was kind of an older guy when he told the story, and it's a hilarious story from a guy who knew more about mushrooms than just about anybody. So Gary Linkoff was also a pretty big guy to help kind of spur the mushroom culture we have today. But Stamets, he's been the guy for quite a while. It's just since the Rogan thing, he kind of came a little bit bigger, but we've all been following him for many, many years for sure.
I just wanted to ask, like, how long have you been in Indiana, and if you think there's going to be any troubles starting up a group there, just because of it's definitely a more conservative state, than your former?
I've been here 6 months, and I don't think there's going to be any trouble at all.
Awesome.
I mostly, I just mostly focus on, as far as the group goes, I focus on edible mushrooms, and we definitely talk about all mushrooms. We don't exclude any mushrooms. There's no reason not to talk about mushrooms just because they're illegal, because maybe someone's not into them, but they still, if they grow in your area, they still need to know how to identify, a mushroom, just in case maybe their dog might eat one or their kids standing there with one. So we don't exclude any mushrooms, but I don't think it's going to be a problem, especially in this particular area, because it's a big morel hunting area, the Midwest in this spot around the Great Lakes. So people here are kind of tuned in. When morel season hits here, I think there's a lot of people that go out hunting. I have noticed in Indiana, or at least in the spot I'm at, when you say mushrooms, that's the only thing people think of is morels. Because like all summer long, I was hunting for chanterelles and chicken of the woods and oyster mushrooms, and I would tell people I'd be out walking around, and they'd be like, "What are you doing?" Like as if I lost something in the woods, and I'm looking for my lost wallet. And I said, "Oh, I'm mushroom hunting." And I didn't know morels grew this time of year. And, well, they don't, but you have a season that has other mushrooms. So I think the interest is there. Like a lot of people don't understand that there's chanterelles and other mushrooms to hunt for. And I think the interest will be there.
That's awesome.
Well, yeah, and that's what's great about when I've been out hunting for the local psilocybin mushroom in the Midwest. If anyone hasn't heard me talk about it before, is they're called ovoids. It's ovoids cystiata. I don't know how to pronounce the species name, but it's the Midwestern psilocybin mushroom. When I'm out hunting for that, if you could do it anywhere, and if anyone asks, as long as you're on public property and not on someone's property, you could just say, "Oh, I'm looking for morels," and everyone's like, "Oh, cool, hope you find them," or whatever. And then I don't feel like I'm ever gonna get caught doing something I shouldn't be doing. I'm just out mushroom hunting, and I think too, like you said, if people are into mycology, even if they don't take psilocybin mushrooms themselves, they're still interested in them. They're still interested in super poisonous mushrooms like Destroying Angel or stuff like that. They obviously aren't going to eat them or touch them, or handle them in an unsafe way. But there's a respect still for all mushrooms, regardless of what their effect may be or if they're edible or not.
Yeah, for sure. And once you start, it's easy for me to be out in the woods and come across somebody that, is asking what I'm doing, and I can talk for an hour to them about mushrooms, and once you start telling them kind of what's going on out there, like, you're standing on a mycelial mat, and you understand that the mycelium is attached to that tree right there, which is also attached to that tree over there. And that mycelium is sending nutrients from tree to tree. And if that tree is sick, it'll send nutrients from that tree over to the other tree through the mycelium. You start talking about that kind of stuff, and they're interested right away. They're like, "What?" So the interest is definitely there. There's some fascinating stuff with them.
Yeah, that's what, and that's where Stamets really speaks to me, is because, my background is like ecology and habitats and stuff like that. And, mushrooms, once you start looking past the mushroom, the fruiting body, and start thinking about the organism that's under the ground and everything that it does. And I forgot the statistic he has that he talks about in the Rogan podcast and whatever, but like the percentage of soil you walk on, how much of that is different mushroom mycelium is insane to think about. We're completely outnumbered. Humans may run the world, or we think we do, or whatever, but like the mushrooms were here first, and everything we have, we owe to them, and that they're really a linchpin of the ecosystem. And I love his view of that, and that's the quote I had at the start. It really resonates with me as an ecologist, but also as a someone who loves edible and active mushrooms as well. It's just it's really cool to think about. It also we're talking about edible, just like tasty mushrooms or whatever. But let's hop into like the medicinal benefits of them, because that's the other thing. Stamets is a great author and a great speaker or whatever, but he also owns and operates one of the biggest mushroom supplement companies, and it's called Host Defense. And there's a lot of stuff on Amazon. I take a bunch of his mushroom blends for like immunity boosting and stuff like that. I have this spray that's about 5 different mushroom extracts that, like, as soon as I start feeling like a little cold or whatever, I take that spray and you just spray it in your mouth like a breath spray kind of. And I just kind of do that several times a day. And like, even if I get sick, it's like the duration's less and stuff like that. So what do you know, Travis, about kind of like the medicinal qualities of chicken of the woods and all those? Do you know?
I know a little bit, like reishi mushroom. I don't know if you know much about the reishi.
Oh yeah.
But it's a very highly potent medicinal mushroom. I've even talked to actual people who were on heart medication, to keep blood pressure down and whatnot. And they started putting a little bit of ground up reishi mushroom in their coffee once a morning, and was within a month, per the doctor, able to quit their heart medication because the mushroom itself was keeping their blood pressure down, boosting their immune system. The reishi mushroom is one that I really look towards as far as their properties. They all have, some properties. The hen of the woods mushroom they're starting to find has some cancer fighting benefits to it. And that's an interesting one because the reishi and the hen of the woods, you can actually grow yourself, which I think is pretty interesting. If you have some issues, you could just get some bags and some sawdust and grow your own medicine,
Yeah.
And then, those are the top 2 that come to my mind. Lion's mane is a big one. I can't remember right off the top of my head what the lion's mane actually is for.
So that one, and Stamets talks about it in the Rogan interview, and I take that actually as a pill. That has neurogenesis properties to where it can regrow damaged neurons. And so he recommends taking it along with a microdose of psilocybin mushrooms.
That's right.
That and I think he recommends a stack with vitamin B or niacin. I'm sorry, which is I think that's I don't know.
Yeah, niacin.
Yeah. But to take niacin, which has like a flushing action. I don't know if anyone's ever taken like high doses of niacin. Doctors recommend it for cholesterol, managing cholesterol levels. But when you take a high dose of niacin, you feel really flushed, like your face gets hot and stuff like that. And it's actually, they use it as the placebo in psilocybin research, I think I read, because you'll actually like have a physical feeling from it. But he recommends to take niacin, lion's mane, and microdose of cubensis to kind of be a nootropic, kind of help with cognition. I mean, there was all sorts of stuff he talked in that Rogan episode about curing Alzheimer's, I think, and stuff like that, just to really help neurological disorders. And so it's kind of crazy that, I mean, to me, lion's mane's probably the most delicious wild mushroom I've eaten, but it also sounds like it's one of the most medicinal and beneficial ones as well.
For sure. The turkey tail is another one that comes to mind. Stamets has a really good story about his mother. She was like in her late 80s, maybe early 90s, and she got breast cancer and started taking turkey tail along with her regular cancer medicines. And he is, a real proponent of the turkey tail helping with, because apparently the turkey tail just is like a super booster for your immune system. So while your body's trying to fight everything off, it just boosts you way up there. So that's another big one, which obviously turkey tail, it's not like a tasty mushroom, it'd be just for the medicinal part.
But yeah, and Rishi's kind of that way too, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, Rishi's not very good to eat. But yeah, they're both really like interesting, unique looking mushrooms, which I think is kind of cool to think that, you know, like they would obviously catch a human's eye and be like, oh, look at that, you know, like, and then it ends up that they're really beneficial once we start researching it, which I think is pretty cool.
And when it comes down to it, they're pretty easy to grow if you wanted to grow them yourself. I mean, we're talking about mushrooms that grow off of, you know, they're saprophytes. So they grow off dead debris. So all you need is some wood chips and, you know, and a bag to put the wood chips in and a little bit of starter mycelium or spores, and you can have your own medicine. You know, they're pretty easy to grow, to be honest.
Yeah. No, I think, you know, and that's one thing that, you know, along with growing psilocybin mushrooms and stuff like that, like it's all kind of the same technique, you know, and it's not that hard. It seems hard to everyone because it's, you know, it's not like growing a tree or anything where you just plant it. Like, you know, you actually have to prepare some stuff because you have to isolate whatever strain of mushroom you're trying to grow. But once you do that, it's not that hard. And that's what's cool, knowing that there's, you know, these beneficial medicinal mushrooms, as well as these gourmet tasty ones, and as well as these ones that are psychedelic and can help with, you know, spiritual personal growth and stuff like that. It's amazing that you can grow your own medicine and your own food like that, you know? And I really recommend, everyone, that's interested in these looking into mushroom cultivation, because it's kind of a cool hobby and it's not as hard as it may sound. And it's definitely a lot safer than trying to just go out in the woods and find mushrooms, because there's a lot of lookalikes of stuff that you know, if it's not poisonous to where you're going to die, it's at least going to give you the shits or make you throw up or, you know, just make for a bad day. So I do, you know, while we're talking about eating all these mushrooms, like you know, there's definitely the warning with this of like, before you eat any mushroom you find in the woods, you definitely want to make sure you're very educated and 100% sure of what you're about to put in your mouth.
For sure. And, you know, that's something that we try to teach people in the group, is that, you know, make sure you know what you're doing. And most people don't know that in their area, there's, you know, in the summer, spring and summer and fall, there's mushroom groups out there, and they usually run mushroom forays. So you can actually go out into the woods with, you know, educated people, and you can just pick mushrooms and come up to the leader of the foray and just ask, what is this? You know, and they're more than happy to talk for hours to you about it. So definitely get the, you know, the education. Kind of going back on the group there that we had, and kind of getting people over the fear of mushrooms. What people, they think most mushrooms are poisonous if you can't eat it. If it's not edible, it's poisonous, which isn't actually true. If it's inedible, it doesn't necessarily mean it's poisonous. It just means you wouldn't want to eat it. You know, it just wouldn't be tasty. Kind of like, you know, it wouldn't really be poisonous to go out and eat a leaf off of your oak tree, but it wouldn't taste good. So that oak tree is inedible. So the vast majority, you know, aren't poisonous. They would give you an upset stomach and you just wouldn't enjoy the flavor, but you definitely do need to get that education. But with today's, you know, the internet and like I say, local clubs that will take you out on forays is pretty, after your first year, it's pretty easy to get into and learn what you can eat and what you can't eat, you know?
Yeah. Well, and once you start getting into like identifying them, like then the whole world opens up while you're out in the woods of like, you know, before you're just like, oh, there's some mushrooms, there's some mushrooms, there's some mushrooms. Once you figure out all the different varieties that there is, like all of a sudden you're like, oh man, there's this and that and this. And you're like, oh, I want to figure out what that is. And, you know, I find Facebook is a really good reference. If you follow these groups and you can post pictures and be like, what is this? Like within 5 minutes, you'll get, you know, a positive confirmation pretty much, of what it is. And it just kind of opens up this whole world of diversity right in front of you that you were kind of ignoring, and that's what was really cool for me, is that, I just kind of disregarded just any mushroom I saw, like, whatever, that's stupid. But now it's like, oh man, I'm like a nerd about it,
Yeah. And once you get past that first little bit of learning about mushrooms, I think most people we were talking about earlier, they start learning about the mycelium, and then it becomes all about learning about the mycelium. What kind of mycelium is this? Is this a saprophyte, that eats dead wood? Or is this is this one that's going to live off of a host plant, and it really becomes all about the mycelium. And that's where the identification comes in. It's like, what is this mycelium doing? Is it breaking down debris? Is it living with a host plant? And no matter where you live, there's going to be a local guide, like there's going to be a mushrooms of Illinois, or mushrooms of the West, or mushrooms of the Midwest. So if you're looking for a book, you could just Google that, and there's going to be a book that's localized to your area, because there can be some books that are a little intimidating. So if you're looking for a book, just kind of Google, mushrooms of my area, and there'll be one.
Yeah. No, that's awesome. So, so to pivot from there into psilocybin mushrooms, like I know a lot of people in the psilocybin mushroom world, and definitely, maybe a little guided from Terrence McKenna's kind of talks about mushrooms being alien technology from space and stuff like that, which, I could buy into, but I also, the scientist in me doesn't. Like, I kind of personally feel just like how, the mushrooms we talked about are beneficial and medicinal to our bodies, and can, cure disease or improve our immune system. Like, I kind of feel like psilocybin mushrooms are just another extension of that. Much like that quote I said with Paul Stamets, that they have the long-term health of the host environment in mind. I kind of feel like that's part of the whole mycelial network of all the different species of mushrooms. Psilocybin is just the one that is beneficial to our minds, that it's kind of, it's part of our evolution with all of the flora and fauna on this planet, that it's just evolved to be beneficial to our minds. How do you kind of feel that psilocybin mushrooms fit into the world of medicinal and gourmet mushrooms?
For me, I don't know. That's a tricky one, because I don't know. That's a tricky one, because I'm a firm believer that not everybody is, I don't know how to word it. They're not for everybody, some people can take them, and even in the right set and setting, I believe, can still just, it doesn't jive with them. It's just not their, it's not their wavelength. Then some people can take them and just, it's a transformation of their life. So that's a tough one for me to answer. I think it just comes down to an individual and kind of where they're at, and what they got going on in their life, and if they're even the type of person who would benefit from them. They're a complex species for me, because I know people that it's like, man, all you need is a couple doses and you could just see things my way. But I know that it wouldn't make them see things my way. It would probably make them not even, like them even more, or it might terrify them. I think most people would benefit from them, but I think there are a lot of people that it's just not their wavelength. So it comes down to the individual and the lifestyle you live and how you've been raised, I think. I think that's a smaller portion of the people that wouldn't benefit. I think most people would benefit if they're in the right set and setting. It's just that's a tough question. I think that the psilocybin is a very, for me at least, psilocybin mushrooms is a very personal thing. I've always enjoyed them the most when I'm completely by myself with nobody around for miles. And I can just kind of go with the flow and do what I need to do. So they've always been a real personal experience for me, where I think some people early on might do them in high school around parties and stuff. And that's a whole different element that you get from them, you know?
Yeah.
So I don't know. The psilocybin ones are tricky for me to pin down as far as who would benefit and kind of what they do for us, because it's such a personal experience for me.
Oh yeah, yeah. No, I mean, I can kind of go either way because, like I said, I have a strong scientific mind for, you know, kind of, I fully believe in evolution and not just of the planet, not just of our species, but just the, you know, evolution is a universal concept. And I kind of just feel that, you know, they've evolved to, you know, along with our mind, all psychedelics have evolved with the human mind. And I kind of feel like, our consciousness and, you know, our kind of the level of our consciousness, if you're not to a certain level yet, then they aren't going to be as meaningful. You may still enjoy it because of the physical effects, but it won't be a mystical watershed, life-changing moment. I think like you already have to be kind of searching for that next level to really get, you know, that experience. And like you said, that is probably more likely going to happen if you're by yourself without distractions. And I know that just in my personal life, not just with mushrooms, but with acid as well, of, when I first took any psychedelics for most of my life of taking psychedelics, it was always in a party atmosphere. It was always with music, lights, other people, and all this stuff. And it wasn't until I made it a very personal thing with intent and, you know, expectation and everything involved, that I really started to gain a lot from it. And so I hate to say that it's not for everyone. It's not for everyone, or it's because not everyone's at the same point in their life, almost, you know, that it's, to really get the most benefit from psilocybin mushrooms, you got to be at a certain point. And you know, I don't know if it's something you can force, but it's something you can strive for and then be able to get that benefit.
You know,
I feel,
you know, I see that because, you know, one thing that surprised me was, you know, in high school and growing up, you always hear, you know, don't take psychedelics if you're going through issues or if you're having a bad day. And then come to find out later in my years, like, oh, well, at Johns Hopkins University, they're taking people who are on their deathbed, who's never done a psychedelic in their life, and they're dosing them. And at first that was just like, what? Like, isn't that person like freaking out? And it turns out, well, no, more than likely, because like you're saying, they're ready. You know, they're at that point mentally where they're ready for it. And even though they're about to die, they're not freaking out. They're actually calming down, and it's actually helping them. And that was one thing that blew my mind away, was like, they're dosing people on their deathbed. Aren't they, you know, they've got to be freaking out. But no, that makes sense, you know.
I mean, they're also with two guides in a controlled situation. You know, I don't know if someone was dying and they're like, well, I'm going to take a heroic dose by myself, and this is the only time I've ever done this. Like, maybe they wouldn't have as good of a time.
Right.
Though,
yeah.
you know?
Things have been explained to them and they're in a very comfortable setting, but they're about to die. And one thing that psychedelics does is it makes you think, and it makes you think more intensely than you ever have before. And it's like, that's all they got to be thinking about is their death. Aren't they freaking out? And turns out, well, no, they're not. They're benefiting from it and they're calming down. And that really blew me away.
Yeah. And I think too, you know, another area that I think about psilocybin mushrooms with other mushrooms in mind. And going back to another part of that Paul Stamets quote, where, you know, he says the membranes are aware, they react to change, and they, you know, they're information sharing membranes. Like, I kind of feel like maybe that's what's going on too, is, you know, I've felt mushroom spirits, and people often talk about the spirit of the mushroom. And I feel that with other medicinal plants and you know, with even cannabis and I've never done ayahuasca, but a lot of people talk about the spirit of ayahuasca. You know, like, there's a part of me that kind of feels like what we're experiencing and calling spirits is the communication, the interspecies communication. You know, that you know, that mushrooms are visionary, right? Like, when you close your eyes, we call it visuals, but, you know, we see different things, and, you know, people will experience entities, or, you know, see parts of their life, or even, like Paul Stamets talked about in that Rogan interview, like, they'll see the future, stuff like that. You know, like, I'm wondering, like, if that is part of the communication network that has evolved too. Have you ever felt that, like a spirit involved with psilocybin mushrooms?
Yeah, definitely. Like, when I'm by myself, there's something else there that's with me for sure. That's undeniable. You know, I can't say that I've ever had something like actually like speak to me, but you can, or at least I can feel it. And, you know, that's another Paul Stamets quote. I don't know the quote exactly verbatim, but he talks about, these plants do communicate and they are intelligent. We just lack the ability to speak that language, you know, and that could be part of the bridge when we're on those psychedelics or on those medicinal plants, is that could be part of the bridge there. Cause I'm not alone when I do it. I know that's for sure. I'm not alone.
The forcing of a trip is, I think, what a lot of people run into, unfortunately.
Yeah. I mean, you know, that's, well, I think, you know, Kenny from a couple episodes back, I don't know if you've watched his videos on YouTube, and I highly suggest everyone check out his channel, The Night Dimension. They're short little videos, but man, that dude has some insight for being as young as he is. But he had a video about to not force enlightenment. And it's very true that I think a lot of people watch, you know, these YouTube channels and stuff like that, and they're like, I want to do that too, you know. And it's a lot of thing with, you know, it's one reason I think my heroic dose video got so many hits, is because people listen to Terrence McKenna or whoever talk about heroic dose, and then they just start Googling that, and they're like, I want to have that experience. And it's just not, you can't force it, you know. And unfortunately, and that's why I have such a problem with people talking about, like, oh, you got to take 20 grams, you got to take 30 grams. And it's like, why not find out what does it for you? You know, when you're taking higher dosages, you're forcing it at that point. You're following, you know, someone else in trying to be like, well, I'm as tough as that guy, you know, I can handle that. Where I don't get that. So, Travis, what do you think about that, with like the dosage kind of debate that goes on online with psilocybin mushrooms?
Yeah, like you were saying, it's kind of like the beat on the chest type deal. I've taken 7, or okay, you took 7 grams. Did you eat a steak right before that and you were on a full stomach? You know, that would be different than me taking 3.5 grams on a completely empty stomach. So it really comes down to the individual, and you know, some people are more sensitive than others to this kind of stuff. So it's definitely, you need to find your way, which is starting small and working your way up, I think, which is what I've done. I've never taken the quote unquote heroic dose because I've never felt the need to. Usually 3.5, 4 grams will get me to where I need to be. And that'll actually get me a year, sometimes 2 years down the road. I right now haven't taken any for about 2 years because I just haven't felt the need to. And not only that, I won't take them unless I have the right setting. So, you know, it's an individual thing. It's a very personal individual thing. And you just need to find that out on yourself. When people start talking about taking 20, 30 grams I scratch my head because it's like, why? You know, like, you wasted a bunch, I think.
Yeah. When you were gone, I just brought up that, the forcing of the trip, I feel like is something that occurs more frequently now with what Ruben mentioned being, YouTubers' remarks of take this amount and you'll have this experience, or at least that's what it's received as. And, those are the people that, might not have a great trip or don't really have as much of a trip and then end up just acting or saying, the paraphrasing of like McKenna's or the cliches of everything. And yeah, I feel like it is very personal. And I mean, I definitely personally forced into into a heroic dose, quote unquote. And I didn't gain much from it except not to do that until I'm prepared again. Like there was nothing, amazing behind it other than, yeah, you messed up. You shouldn't take this, like take it a little bit one step at a time, like you mentioned, and figure out your life beforehand, figure out your routine. If it takes a week or a month to calm yourself down to prepare for something that can be as powerful as you can help allow it to be, you have to find your own route before ingesting these things.
Yeah, because at the end of the day, it's your experience. You're the one that's taking them. So, yeah, you should follow your own path for sure. But it's easy to, McKenna, I think, love him as much as we do. It's easy to fall into that trap of the heroic dose and doing it the proper, unquote, way. But at the end of the day, you're the one taking them. You're the one having that experience. So, he also did say if you don't feel anything, take more. So there's no reason to, jump right into the deep end, in my opinion.
Yeah. And there's been a couple times where I've actually, made tea and just kind of sipped it, and just like kind of instead of just downing everything at once, just kind of like ease into the whole experience, just sip a bottle of tea over a course of an hour and a half or so, and it's kind of a little more pleasant that way. I think it's just everyone has to find, like you said, has to find their own way. And that's one problem I have. And if anyone follows me around on the internet, they see that I have a very hard time ignoring trolls and arguments, especially about dosage. And the biggest problem I have with it is the idea of the people that enjoy high dosages, the idea that they try to put forth to other people that don't feel like taking as high a dosage, that their experience isn't valid because they didn't take what they took. They couldn't or didn't want to take 30 grams. So whatever they took under that amount isn't valid. And that's just the part I hate, because it's like every experience is valid. If someone had never done any drugs before and they took 1 gram of mushrooms and they have a funny story about what happened, I want to hear that story. That's a great experience, and I don't like, like you said, Travis, the chest beating of like, no, it's, you have to eat at least an ounce or it's not even worth it. I really hate that.
Yeah. I don't know. I think mushrooms, the psilocybin aspect, it's always been such a personal thing for me and I've always, not always, but in my adult years, like I said, would go off by myself. Being in Colorado like I was, I'd just go in the middle of the mountains in the middle of nowhere. And it was such a personal experience. 3.5 grams in the middle of the mountains by yourself is an extremely powerful experience. I don't care who you are, so I don't know. I just stress to people it's such a personal thing, and do your own thing, do what feels right to you,
So the other thing I wanted to talk about, that I know you saw my recent video I put out about, it was labeled microdosing, a parenting life hack. And I know that you're a parent as well. So I was wondering if you can speak on, your kind of experience of how you juggle, psychedelic usage, even though you said, you haven't, it's infrequent, but how you, and not just use of mushrooms or any other psychedelic, but how you juggle being a, psychedelic person with being a parent.
I think first and foremost is honesty. They're my children. And to be honest, a lot of people say being a parent is a selfless act, but on a lot of aspects, it's also selfish because they're like little mini versions of you. So if you're lying to your kids, you're lying to yourself. If you're, I grew up in the dare era where, you had the officer come to school and he just say no and all drugs are bad. Then I grew up and got into high school and learned that they're not all bad and they're not all as bad as I was told. And that was dangerous, because then I kind of went down the wrong path a few times with drugs because it was like, oh, well, I won't die the first time I do this. So they were lying to me so I could just go to town. And I think that's dangerous. So I think first and foremost is just to be open and completely honest with your children. Now, that being said, at certain ages, they're just not ready. There's things they just can't understand. So being open and honest at certain ages in their life is important. Not necessarily hiding things from them, but, just when it's appropriate, having open and honest discussions, and where I'm at with my kids right now, my daughter's still pretty young. She's 7. So, that's not even on her radar. None of that kind of stuff is on her radar. My son is getting into middle school, so it's kind of coming closer for him. And I'm just honest with him. I don't lie about my past usage of intoxicants. I've told him there are good drugs and there are bad drugs, and you can misuse both of them. And your father has, abused a few of the, both sides of them. Even if it's a good drug, quote unquote, it can still be abused. So I think honesty with your children and not trying to hide things when they're ready, when they're of age and can understand and comprehend what you're saying to them, because like I say, like my daughter at age 7, stuff like that's not even on her radar. And so it's not even an issue, but the older they get, just be honest with them. And I think that goes a long way.
Yeah. I mean, it's kind of funny because that kind of parallels, how drug policy, in our country or in the world, how, it's kind of the same thing. They're not, the policymakers are not honest about these substances, and it leads to more drug abuse. Just like if you're not honest to your kids, it can lead to drug abuse, like I mean, the fact that psilocybin mushrooms and LSD are lumped in with heroin is kind of ridiculous, and that just shows that they're not being honest with us, or that they just have no frame of reference with it. But either way, the just say no, war on drugs mentality, I think creates this unnecessary fear in some people, but then this also, well, you lied to me, so I could do whatever I want, kind of bravado in others. And I think, that just goes it parallels how what you're saying about parenting. Much like you, my kids are too young to really talk about it. My son knows that I have a YouTube channel and a podcast, and I tell him, don't listen to that, don't watch that, don't whatever, and I think he pays attention to that now and follows that direction. But I don't know how that will be in the future. I also think a lot of this stuff is too boring for him to really understand. But so I haven't had to have that discussion yet, but yeah, much like you, I'll be the same way. I'll be like, listen, this is how it is. And, this is what I've done. And I hope that, I come across truthful enough that once he does have questions about drugs that his friends are doing and stuff, that he will be open with me so that I can kind of give him a better guidance than just say no.
Yeah. I want my kids, they know I'm going to shoot straight with them. If it's good news or bad news, I'm just shooting straight from the hip. I'm going to let them know how it is right off the bat. So when that time comes, it's not a taboo issue, and we can just talk about it. It's not, embarrassing to talk about, or you're not in any trouble. You're not a lesser of a person because you're interested or intrigued by something. You're just human, and you're a mini me version of me, and you're no different in a lot of ways. And so, yeah, it's a fine line, but I think just open and honesty when they're ready is the key.
Yeah. And you saying that, if you're lying to them, you're lying to yourself. I think that's one of the keys right there.
Yeah. Cause in the long run, it's just a little version of yourself. So why lie? And I've always kind of tried to go along the lines of, if it's something you're ashamed of, you probably shouldn't be doing it in the first place. So if you're ashamed of something, you just maybe look at cutting that out. And if you're not ashamed of it, like my son from the age of 6 months on up until recently, we've lived in Colorado where they have legal marijuana. So his entire life is completely different than mine. Like growing up, I grew up, just say no, where in Colorado being legal, they talk about it in school in a educational way. And it's just a thing. It's just a thing. And like when we moved here, I told him, like, well, it's, marijuana is illegal in Indiana. So you won't see dad really, messing with it as much or whatever, or going to the store. And he was like, his first question was like, well, they don't even have it for medicine, because he's learned he learned in school that it's a medicine, So I think just being honest with the kids is the key.
Yeah. Going off of this, one of the funniest things I saw, Ruben, was a comment on the microdosing video about how do you help your kids not cultivate an ego, and you responded by saying, you said, well, I just told my 4-year-old that he is the universe in his head and heart, and he asked if he could have a cookie.
Yeah.
I thought that was hilarious. You have to, the time isn't right,
Yeah. Well, and, I appreciate that comment if that person is listening. And I understand that. And yeah, that's a discussion to have about ego. And I think also I mentioned it on there, but there's a terminology problem that I think exists in our modern psychedelia. When we say ego death, right? So the whole idea of the ego and the id, it also involves the superego, and that all goes back to Freudian psychology, his idea of the reality principle. And so I think when we say ego death, actually that is the superego death, and the superego is cultural like norms and stuff like that, and that's what's taught to you by your parents. And the parents do have kind of like a little bit that they can form of that, but you do that by them seeing how you react in situations and knowing how to react. our ego, our id is basically our primal, drive. And our ego is, as we become adults, it's what forms to be our like common sense and reasoning. And you have no part of that really as a parent. Like that just happens from living and life. And how do you cultivate that or not cultivate? Like you can't not cultivate it. I think I mentioned in there too, like I think the only way that a human could be raised to not have an ego would be to live from birth to death inside a sensory deprivation chamber. Like, I mean, even if you don't have parents, you're going to develop an ego, because that's just, as you become a human and just grow up with other humans, you learn reasoning and common sense. You don't just do whatever comes to mind. So I kind of converse too much in the YouTube comments, like I tend to do with that question. But I think that's where I was getting at, is like, I just have to raise these kids and keep them alive. Like, like that's right now, that's the only thing. Like I need to feed them and get them to bed and make sure they take a shower or bath and whatever. That's the biggest part. I think like, where psychedelics are helping me raise them is just by being a better person and being a better model for them, that they are seeing me be a more peaceful, understanding person, which will in turn make their ego that they are cultivating themselves be a more peaceful, understanding ego, if that makes sense.
Yeah. And I just completely agreed with the mix up of terminology there, like the definition, because it is a keyword that gets thrown around everywhere in these type of discussions. And it just doesn't, it's never been like specifically defined what you're talking about when you say ego death, and people kind of run with it.
Yeah. And I mean, I attribute ego death to reaching a state of timelessness and a state of not remembering the aspects of your life, like getting back to the core essence of your spirit. But that I really wish we could get away from two terms in modern psychedelia, and that is the heroic dose term and ego death, because heroic gets attributed to a dosage level. And like I keep saying, it's not, it's intent and expectation. And that's what makes whatever dosage it is, if you are kind of scared of it and expect that it could go bad, then it's heroic. And with an ego death, it's not, the term ego has been kind of compounded into something it's actually not. And what it was, the idea and the theory behind it, it isn't what we talk about with psychedelics. And again, it's not a death, because it comes back. Everything comes back, but you gain a new kind of perception of life from that, and to go back to that guy's comment, like, yeah, I can't tell that to a 4-year-old, like there's no way to raise a 4-year-old to understand that idea, So, that's where psychedelics and parenting come into play, is I'm just trying to better myself to be a better role model for my kids. And I feel like it's working.
Yeah, for sure. I think it'd be better to call it an ego pause, just kind of pauses your ego for a couple hours. Because like you said, even the people that talk about, the greatest DMT experience, your ego still comes back, yourself, it all comes back eventually. So that's a good point. And,
I mean, not to mention, if your ego was totally gone, you wouldn't remember any of it. Like it's, you would have just turned into a complete caveman and just been, I mean, and that's what I guess what happens to people. Like I read some trip report about some guy that blacked out and then he woke up and he had just destroyed his room and shit all over the floor and stuff like that. Like maybe that's what happened. Like if we completely get rid of our ego, we just turn into an ape. Maybe I don't know. That's unfortunately
that freaking horrific.
Yeah. Yeah. Unfortunately at the time that early psychologists like Freud and stuff came up with stuff, they weren't messing around with magic mushrooms or other psychedelics. He was high on cocaine the whole time, but it like that really hasn't been approached. Like modern research with psychology or with psychedelics is all done in like a therapy realm, but not really like a full on psychological like evaluation makeup kind of thing. For what I've seen at least.
Yeah, I think and going back to the parenting thing, it'll probably be more of an issue once the kids hit high school. Because they're going to be getting information from other high school kids, which that's the one thing I'm concerned about, is because they do confide in their friends, but what they don't realize is their friends are just kids themselves. So that's why I'm trying to be so honest to my son now, is that way when he gets to that point, hopefully he's like, well, Dad's already been through all this, so maybe hopefully he confides in me a little bit rather than confiding in his friends too much, because themselves are also just children and they can only know so much. So the whole parenting aspect is just hoping that I'm as honest with I can be with him now, and that later on when it does matter, he does come to me, for answers. Not that I have all the answers, but I feel that I'll have more answers than the kids he's going to school with,
Mm-hmm. Are those topics that there is a correct time to bring them up, or is that something that you wait to get asked about?
I think every kid's different, because I've met 12-year-olds that are, almost act like they're 16, where my kid's 11 going on 12, but to be honest, he's still got a lot of innocence in him, and which is fine with me. I want him to be young and have fun as long as he can be. So, some kids though you meet and they're 12 years old and you're like, man, what have you been doing? Because you act like you're 16 or 17, they're real streetwise and just, so it really depends on the kid, I think. But middle school, I think they're going to start mingling with other kids that are a little more advanced in those topics. So I think, early middle school, is a time to ease into it. And like I was saying, in Colorado, being that like marijuana is legal, they talk to the kids early on about, medicine and marijuana in a real, educational way. And that's not a bad thing, because I mean, there's no, we have alcohol and we drink around our kids sometimes, and they know what alcohol is. They know what a glass of wine is, so there's no reason to start a little early, you kind of hinting around the topic of it and kind of, hey, this is what this is. And, when he was real young, and my daughter, we talked to him about alcohol, and they would ask, well, what does it do? Oh, well, it changes your brain for a little while. It makes you kind of silly, and it relaxes you a little bit, and just kind of lighthearted things like that. But, the closer they get to middle school, they're going to be mingling with some kids who may have older brothers or sisters or parents who aren't quite as, I don't know, parenting as they should be. So, I've already kind of casually brought up psychedelic mushrooms to him. My son knows more about mushrooms than, edible mushrooms and wild mushrooms than most adults. He's been mushroom hunting since he could walk. So he knows everything about mycelium and all that. And actually, just this year, we were mushroom hunting, and he said, "Oh, there's a mushroom," and it kind of resembled a psilocybin, just a brown mushroom. And I kind of off the cuff was like, "Oh, it looks like a psilocybin," and that's kind of how I eased into it. And he asked, "Well, what's that? I've never heard of that mushroom." So I kind of casually kind of, oh, well, it's this mushroom that, it's a medicinal mushroom for your spirit and for your mind that adults take, and kind of eased him into that, conversation a little bit. We didn't go too deep. And to be honest, he didn't really care. He was like, oh, that's okay. And we kind of just went on from there. So, I think it depends on the kid, because some kids are a little more innocent than others at certain ages, and some kids are, a little more advanced than others. So the middle school, I think, is when you should really kind of start easing into it, honestly. I don't know how you feel, Ruben.
Well, I mean, obviously my kids aren't that old, but I think, like looking back, my parents didn't really need to have those talks because I lived in a small isolated town. They were unexperienced themselves. Like my parents didn't really smoke weed. They had a couple friends that did and stuff like that. They really didn't feel the need, I guess, to have those discussions. So I was kind of on my own once that happened. Which is probably one of the reasons I did so much acid in high school, because it was like, what's this? Like, I'd never fucking heard of that. That's awesome, and so like maybe I wouldn't have done as much if my parents would have talked to me about it. But I think we live in such a different time now with the internet that you kind of almost have to have that discussion, especially in middle school. I guess, I haven't had the discussion, but maybe I should with my son. And he's in fourth grade, about at least cannabis, because he plays video games that'll have, they're starting to see weed. Like, I forgot what he was watching, some YouTube video about a video game. He was like, Dad, look at this weed farm. And I think it was like a Grand Theft Auto video that he was watching. And he was like, look at that. Isn't that pretty cool? And I was like, yeah, but like they're already exposed to it just because of not just the internet, but how relaxed the laws are starting to get with it. Unfortunately, it depends on which set of imaginary lines you're in or not. But other than that, it's just much more out there, open. People are talking about it than when I was his age. So I definitely, I think I do have to have that talk earlier than my parents would have with me. But I also wonder too, as psychedelics are getting, people are talking more and more about them. Like if we have to have the psychedelic talk with them earlier now, because of the same reason, they're going to run across that, through their online stuff. I'm probably a bad example of that, because I'm not very good at policing what my kid observes online. I definitely should be better than that. But I think the internet and how open our society is and how fast everything moves, I think definitely that talk needs to come earlier than the prior generations, for sure.
Yeah. And I kind of stress that, at least to my children, that, there's good intoxicants and there's bad intoxicants, and you can abuse both of them. I think that's an important point to make to the kids, like there's some that can be used as really beneficial medicines, and there's some that just really doesn't need to be used at all, So, and it doesn't, and that first talk doesn't need to be like the sit down, big dramatic talk. I don't think you can ease into it, like you say, it's more open nowadays. So you can kind of just make comments here and there and kind of just do little talks when the time is right. It doesn't have to be like the sex talk or whatever, you can kind of ease into it with them, that way it's not such a fear type thing where you sit them down and you're like, this is the way it is and you shouldn't do this and you shouldn't do that. It can be approached, kind of casually at first, I think.
Yeah. Another, to go back to my YouTube video, another comment I wanted to touch on was someone put, are you trying to get CPS and DEA to kick your door down and kidnap your children. And I kind of had to laugh at that because, that's obviously a worry, because I'm sure people that either talk about drugs or have drugs at their house there's definitely stories out there of people getting caught and getting their kids taken away for drug activity, right? But I think if you look at that, there was something else that happened to bring the cops there. They were either selling or growing weed or, being much more brazen to have that happen. Most people, whether you have kids or not, that get caught with drugs get caught because of something else, there's a lot of people that get caught because when you get in a car and you're driving on the road, you have much less rights than just being at your house. But to speak to that, as far as me personally with my YouTube channel, no, I'm not worried about that. I think that someone with as few views as I have and as few subscribers, I'm nowhere near being on the radar of the DEA. And as far as CPS, like I don't think anyone watching my videos is going to be someone that would call CPS on me or would know how to find out who I am and where I am. Is that ever with any drug usage a concern of yours of police being involved and your kids getting taken away at any case?
Not really. Like you said, if you're in your car, you definitely have a lot less rights. But if you're in your car with drugs and your children, you're kind of asking for it anyway. And as far as living at home, yeah, not really. I'm a pretty low key guy. Like you say, usually something else is going on, like a domestic issue or a selling or growing issue. And I'm not that guy. So, it's never been a huge concern of mine, honestly. We kind of keep to ourselves. We're pretty introverted and kind of do our own thing. I feel like I have pretty good children and pretty good home life. So, I'm not really worried about it. Now, like you said, being in a vehicle is a whole different story. You got to be a lot more careful. So if you're driving around with drugs in your car and your children, you're kind of asking for it.
Sure. Yeah, I definitely stay away from that kind of scenario. And like you said, I'm low key as well. And as far as putting myself out there with podcasts and YouTube, like my whole goal with all of this is to be honest, to be open, and to show that I'm not a bad guy and that people that do these things are not bad people. I feel like that fear that people might have, like the person who made that comment about things like that happening, the DEA and CPS and the government in general, they're more efficient in, curbing drug usage by spreading that fear than by actually going after anyone. Because, the more we are afraid to talk about something, the less, we're likely to spread the positive information about it. And that's what the whole goal with this channel and podcast is, to just spread the positive information, to obviously make people aware of the dangers, but to just show that normal, good people can still, get the benefit from psychedelics and drugs in general, that they don't have to be lumped into the criminal element like our drug policy tries to make them, get lumped into. So yeah, I had a laugh at that comment, but I do have kind of a serious response to that though, as far as what I just went through.
Yeah, as long as you're smart with it, I think there's no harm. I don't see any scenario, if you're smart about it and you keep your children and drug use or psychedelic use separate, other than obviously talking to them about it. But keeping them separate so that they're not in the same place at the same time, I think you're pretty well off on not getting in trouble.
And who wants kids around anyway? They're such downers, right?
Yeah, buzzkill.
So yeah. So I mean, I'm pretty sure 99% of the time, if they was to bust Ruben's door down, they just find him playing with his kid.
Yeah.
So
I mean, yeah, that's the reason in my videos I have the star shit up, is so that you guys don't see all the fucking toys all over the place and everything, like it's not a drug den here, But yeah, and I'll just tell a story real quick about like to show how little the government follows up. Back when I was in college, I was ordering weed from Amsterdam, and I got a bunch of packages sent to the dorms. I signed at the front desk for the package and whatever, and I got hash and weed, and it was great. I got like 3 or 4 packages, and after a bunch of successful packages, I was like, oh, I'm gonna get a real big amount. And in between them shipping it and me getting it, the 9/11 attacks happened, and about 2 or 3 months later, I get a call that there's a package for me at the front desk, and I go up there, and there's a pretty big package with this yellow caution tape wrapped all around it that says "Opened by U.S. Customs," and reeks like weed. And so my RA hands me the package, and I sign for it, and I go downstairs and I open it up, and there is vacuum sealed the vacuum sealing like bags with like the indentations of nugs and hash and stuff like that in it, and then a letter that says like this package was found to have contraband in it. If you would like to follow up, please contact the Homeland Security or whatever. And nothing ever came of that. Like, obviously, like they should have followed up, and they didn't even follow up on that. So, I'm not worried about putting myself out there on the internet, because it's the internet's a big place. There's a lot of people on YouTube and a lot of podcasts talking about much worse stuff. And I don't feel that I'm, on the radar at all. And then, yeah, in my personal life, as far as like local authorities, I'm not on their radar either. I'm just a dad. So, yeah, I mean, I'm not worried about it. But, so, I want to wrap it up, but actually I was just thinking about when you were talking about, when you were talking back there, Travis, that I actually mentioned something, when we were talking about edible mushrooms, that I was mistaken, where I got chicken and hen of the woods mixed up, and it's hen of the woods I've never eaten. Chicken of the woods I've eaten, and was really good, but it gave me really, really, really bad farts. And I just want.
Well, you do have to make sure the chicken, you do have to cook it real thoroughly.
Okay.
Yeah.
Maybe that's what it was. Have you gotten that with any other edible mushrooms? Cause I've been afraid to eat it ever since. I love it. It was a really good taste, and it's a really cool mushroom. But are there other mushrooms that you found can give you gas really good?
A lot of that comes from not cooking them enough, and chicken is one that some people can have a slight allergic reaction to. Morels actually as well. But I guess that's one thing we should say with wild mushrooms, or any mushrooms that you eat. They should not be eaten raw. They have keratin in them. Is that what it's called? Keratin. And that, you can't digest that. It's the same stuff that your like hair and fingernails are made out of. So unless you cook it thoroughly, you will have some digestive issues. And that's where a lot of like the psilocybin ones, when people say they upset their stomach, well, it's because you ate raw mushrooms, and it's just your stomach. It's not any poison. It's just they didn't get cooked thoroughly, and that keratin didn't get broken down enough. So most likely and chicken of the woods is one it's a real meaty, thick mushroom. So it does take a little while to cook. So you probably just didn't cook it long enough, to be honest.
Yeah, I'm guessing that was it. Yeah, because I find it a lot, and I only ate it one time, and I do remember that. I mean, I had painful gas all night long. It was pretty bad.
And that's why I shifted from eating psilocybin mushrooms to making a tea, because then I don't have to ingest the mushroom matter itself, and the tea, it does just fine as far as potency. And then I don't have any stomach issues throughout my experience.
Yeah. No, I definitely recommend that to people as well. I still get a little nauseous, but I think it's from the anxiety, but it's nowhere near, as bad as ingesting all the stuff. Cause I've had one trip one time where like, I was starting to like have a bad trip and I felt like all this pressure and it was like all this emotional kind of stuff going. And then I let out this huge fart and it was like euphoric. Like all of a sudden, like, like it was weird. Like my brain couldn't comprehend that I had a fart really bad. And once I got that out, it was like, oh, and it was, I mean, yeah, it was like almost orgasmic almost. It was
right.
That's is that the lemon tech? Like, is that the tea or?
Well, so when I make tea, I lemon tech it first, and then I make like a tea of, a chai tea or something like that. And I just put the whole lemon juice and mushrooms into the tea, let that sit for a little bit, and then get a strainer or not cheesecloth, coffee filter, something like that to get the mushroom material out, and then squeeze that real good to just get as much juice out as I can. Is that kind of what you do, Travis?
No. So what I do is get a tea ball, those little balls that you can put loose leaf tea in. And depending on my dosage, usually one tea ball is enough, but I just get like the type of tea I like, which is oolong tea, but you can get any loose leaf tea. And I just fill half side of the tea ball up with the loose leaf tea. And then I just I grind the mushrooms down real good or chop them up real fine. And I jam the rest of the tea ball with the mushrooms. And then I just steep it. And I usually put like a little dab of honey because I like honey. So I put a little dab of honey in my tea and I steep it for about 5 minutes and drink it. And then I fill it up again and casually drink it over the course of maybe 20 minutes. And that's all I do.
Oh, okay. Do you find that the caffeine from the tea does anything?
No, I think oolong, the type I drink, is real low caffeine. I think it's a pretty light tea. It's not very dark. It's really light. I think it's low caffeine if I remember right. Because caffeine affects me. Like if I don't drink coffee or nothing. So if I have like a cup of coffee, I'm just off the walls. And then an hour later, I'm asleep an hour later. So I've never had an issue with the caffeine. So yeah, it's pretty low tech. And if I want to take a higher dose, I use 2 tea balls, but just chop them up and throw them in a tea ball and steep it just as if I was having tea, just add mushrooms. So, but before we go, just another shameless plug to the Telluride Mushroom Fest. If anybody's near Colorado in August, or anybody that wants to go to a really special mushroom festival, when I say festival, it's not your typical festival. It's not like a bunch of tents set up with people selling stuff to you. It's mostly educational. It's all around the town of Telluride in different areas, like at the high school and different lecture halls. So it's just all these different lectures from all these different mycologists, some of the top in the country. Stamets is usually there. And it's educational ones, but it's one of the few mushroom festivals in the United States where they're allowed to talk about psychedelics. So they actually have, MAPS will usually be there doing a lecture, and Stamets will do 2 or 3 lectures. 1 or 2 of them will be about psychedelics. Some of them will be about medicinal. So it's a really educational festival over the course of 4 days. And at the same time, each day they have mushroom forays with all these top mycologists that you can just go out into the field with and pick a mushroom and come up to some of the top mycologists and just ask them, what is this? And they're more than happy to talk to you. So if anybody ever has a chance to go to that, you should definitely check out the Telluride Mushroom Festival. If you have if you want to know what it's like, there was a documentary made about it called Know Your Mushrooms, with a guy, one of the main guys in it is Larry Evans. And if you're in the mushroom circle, he's a top mycologist. Just, he's off the charts. When you sit down with Larry Evans, you feel like you're so stupid because he's such an intelligent individual. So, yeah, the documentary is called Know Your Mushrooms, and it's a fun documentary, but it also kind of shows the Telluride Mushroom Fest and what they do there to give you an idea. But if anybody ever has a chance to go to that, you should definitely go for sure.
Yeah, that sounds awesome. I definitely hope I can do that at some point. But yeah,
It's pretty fun.
Well, yeah. Well, yeah. So with that, we'll wrap it up. And thank you so much, Travis, for coming on and talking mushrooms and other stuff with us. And I definitely wanted to say I appreciate how active you've been with commenting and reaching out. You're definitely an example of what keeps me going with this. That I'm not falling on deaf ears here, and it's awesome. I look forward to all your comments and messages, man. It's great.
Yeah, man. Sometimes I can go on a little too long about mushrooms. So yeah, I can, it's a passion in my life. So anytime I can help, just let me know.
Yeah. Awesome. So, again, thanks for listening, everyone. And, if, like I said, we have a lot of people interested in coming on the podcast, and I want to get everyone on that can. But if you're listening and you're interested, email us at helpfindtheothers@protonmail.com. And, we've only had the one call in voicemail, but again, I would love to have some more. If anyone wants to call and leave a message, or I think you can text as well. Stan, what's that number again?
It's 567-233-1335.
Awesome. So, yeah, that's about it for now. And until next time, let's help find the others.